You're watching 22 News in Focus. We are continuing our conversation now about the Lieutenant Governor's resignation and other happenings on Beacon Hill. We spoke with Lieutenant Governor Tim Murray earlier in the program, but now we're continuing our conversation with Clinton State Representative Harold Naughton and Chicopee State Representative Joseph Wagner. Thanks again, both of you, for being here. Obviously, we want to ensure things are still happening, even with a lot of these shifting, moving around on Beacon Hill. And the budget is a big one. That's something that's coming up. We want to know what's included in it. What does the local aid look like? What does this look like now?
Both the House and Senate are up in terms of local aid. The Senate did less on higher ed than we did in the House, which is not the way it traditionally has gone, but the House substantially bumped up aid for and revenues for higher education, and the Senate did a lesser amount. And we did more for community colleges than did the Senate. So I think we were about $25 million higher for the University of Massachusetts than the Senate, about $22 million higher for community colleges than the Senate. The Senate did more on circuit breaker, special education circuit breaker, and they did an expanded bottle bill in the Senate, and in the House we did perhaps a little bit more on economic development. So what happened is both budgets had the same bottom line, and they were very similar to the bottom line of the budget that the governor submitted for our consideration. And so we will no doubt offer up to the governor for his consideration a balanced budget, but each side has staked out ground, and some of it is political gamesmanship, but we have our priorities, they have theirs. We establish them knowing that the other branch may have different priorities, and then we get down to the work of balancing it.
For our parts of the Commonwealth, I think both the House and Senate have looked more deeply at regional school transportation, obviously affecting us in central and western Massachusetts more so oftentimes than eastern Massachusetts. And so we've attacked that. The goal has always been to fund that at as close to 100% as possible, and we've pushed that up to about 73% this year, and we're moving forward on that. We're also trying to keep our promise to our veterans, our return. We've got 40,000 new veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. As you know, I've served both in Iraq and Afghanistan myself. And to keep employment, training, housing, homelessness prevention, treatment of post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, keeping that at the forefront of these, as I said, 40,000 new veterans on top of about 365,000 veterans from other wars. So we're trying to keep these promises to our stakeholders, to our constituencies around the Commonwealth, and I think this budget has done a fair and balanced act of that. And we'll have it to the governor. The conference committee I have faith in will come out with a document very shortly, and to the governor. I mean, it's only the beginning of June right now, and we have time that we'll have a budget on time.
Is there anything major on the chopping block that you know of, or any layoffs? Of course we like to highlight the good, but of course we want to at least be ready for what may or may not be on the chopping block.
No, I don't see that. State revenues are ticking up, and I was on the phone yesterday for about half an hour with the Secretary of Economic Development. My work now as chairman of the Economic Development Committee has me having a constant dialogue with Secretary Bielecki, and he accurately stated that some regions of the Commonwealth are doing better than some other regions, and here in Western Mass we are still lagging with our unemployment disproportionately higher than in some regions that have started to rebound a little more quickly. Our numbers have moved, but not as much and not as favorably as in some other regions. So the Secretary is very attentive to that. Hank talked about the things outside of Boston, where we tend to experience some of the same kinds of things, and the issues don't parallel each other necessarily between Western and Central right down the line, but more often than not there's a lot of common ground. So I don't think you'll see layoffs, but we're budgeting conservatively, and even at that, we've got to look at revenues in the area of transportation to support this year's state spending plan. In the absence of that, a lot of road and bridge work won't get done, and in fact, there could be layoffs. So this budget is tied to a pending transportation finance matter that is before the House and Senate conferees.
Is there anything to address welfare reform? There have been a number of reports out. One, that money is going to deceased, and there was a vote about putting pictures on cards. Is there any? Where do you stand on this issue?
I've got a. May I?
Absolutely.
Because here in Western Massachusetts, and I don't think it was necessarily intentional on the part of a local newspaper, the Springfield Republican, each Sunday runs a column where they show how they voted. And so you see House and Senate votes. Well, after the House budget debate in late April, the first column in May said the House voted against 3 welfare reform measures. And in fact, there were 3 amendments offered by a Republican colleague. We had addressed each of those things, however, in the House budget. So we had addressed, for example, photo IDs for those receiving EBT cards and EBT benefits. And that is in the House budget. We had a Republican colleague who offered up that the use of Social Security numbers should be mandatory when verifying income. And we voted against that. We did it for a good reason, because in the House budget, we provide a provision that says that the Department of Transitional Assistance may in fact use Social Security numbers if they need to verify income for housing eligibility. However, they've got 4 other tools in the toolbox, including the previous year's tax reforms and other measures, to determine income. So why would we impose a mandate when we can give them the benefit of using the same information, including Social Security numbers, coupling it with other things, and getting at the answer in the quickest, most efficient, least costly way to the taxpayers? So we did a comprehensive welfare reform measure in the House budget, but the public isn't necessarily aware of that. So this forum presents, I think, a good opportunity to get some of that out. And I will say, on the $2 million that the state auditor pointed out, a number of reforms have already been taking place. That information is somewhat dated, and I would argue that most often, maybe more than 99%, and well above 99%, the system works and it's efficient. And I'll bet that if you went to the federal government and asked the question, how many deceased people on Social Security, how many dollars are going out the door in benefits, I'll bet it's a big number, certainly far exceeding $2 million. So we're cognizant that there are problems. We want to get at solutions to the problems. We took a huge step in the House budget. The Senate didn't take up those measures, but before they rolled out their budget, the Senate president said, we will absolutely do a welfare reform measure. In fact, today she announced some of the parameters of that. So,
I mean, having to deal with the VA on a pretty regular basis, I won't even get into what the federal bureaucracies are like. I went to law school nights, Suffolk Law School, and I worked my way through law school as a welfare fraud investigator for the state. Since I've been in the House, this has been on the top of my radar screen, right at the center of my radar screen, that every dollar used in assistance to our needy fellow citizens around the Commonwealth be stretched to its maximum utility, that we don't waste. And I think we've done a very good job. We did a comprehensive welfare reform bill in the late 90s. As time goes on, things change and evolve. We need to re-examine that, and we have. And on a consistent basis, as Representative Wagner has laid out. But it's also our job, and I think we do it well, to hold the administration's feet to the fire. You know, what articles like what Joe described in the Springfield Republican don't put out is that some of those reforms that so-called reforms would have cost more to implement than they would have saved if we had voted for them. The initial implementation within the past few years. Now we're moving forward on the pictures, on the IDs, etc. It's intolerable that any type of fraud takes place, but I think we're doing a pretty good job staying on top of it. Are
there enough investigators in the state? I mean, when we look at the big picture, you know, there's of course a number of people who, with that office in the eastern part of the state, are there enough investigators to cover the state, to be able to look into these cases? You know, a number of emails that I get here at the station is that people are submitting claims, letting the state know about certain circumstances, and nothing happens.
So in the House budget, we create a new Bureau of Program Integrity. Okay, That's within the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and their primary objective is to prevent, detect, and correct fraud, waste, abuse, and inefficiencies. In theory, based on the way that the budget provision is written, they would be able to identify if there are a lack of resources, both in terms of personnel or financial, in order to capture things that go to fraud and abuse and waste. But I think on balance, people who look at this closely would agree that we are moving this substantially in the right direction. Technology, by the way, and technological advances allow us to do things today that we couldn't do even a decade ago. And I want the public to be aware that each and every day this issue is front and center. The taxpayers deserve nothing less than our best effort. The votes were accurately reported, but not in context.
Okay.
And context is critically important.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about that. In fact, I appreciate you both being here, Rep. Harold Naughton and Joe Wagner. Thank you both so much for being here and talking all about this. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know there's many more things we could talk about. We're going to have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus.